Good afternoon and welcome to this IDP Connect webinar entitled What Really Matters to Students, a chance to hear about and delve into the results of our recent Whatuni Student Choice Awards. I'm Aaron Porter, I'm the Director of Policy and Engagement at IDP Connect, and I'm joined by two colleagues, Jonah Duffin, the Chief Marketing Officer, and Tristan Connolly, the Senior Data Analyst. We've got some slides prepared which will present between the three of us, and Jonah will do most of the heavy lifting for the presentation. But I should just say two things just before we kick off. The first is that we will take questions and comments, and so if there's things that you're hearing that you want to follow up or clarify or check, you should see on the right hand side of your or on your screen that there is a questions tab, and if you click on that questions tab, there's an opportunity to ask questions, and so we'll be monitoring those as the presentation proceeds. The final thing to say is that we've got an hour for the session, and we're hoping that we'll run through the slides and then we'll come to the questions. So hopefully that's all straightforward. We'll kick on to the presentation now. And just really to set the context of who the sample size is and what we were dealing with, we undertook a sample of 41,000 student reviews this year. This is the 6th year that the whatuni.com website has undertaken student reviews, and this is the largest sample that we've had. Indeed, we've grown it from about 15,000 early on, and it's now up to 41,000 in its 6th year. A number of you will know that there are two primary ways in which we source the reviews. The first is through online collection. Students are able to go online and enter a review, and these are verified. We also go through a campus collection process, and so you'll see that there's a mixed model of both physical and online reviews. We do have a threshold for a number of reviews at each institution. That threshold varies slightly by institution size. So for some institutions, it's 200 students. For smaller institutions, it's 150. But altogether, we have 131 institutions across the United Kingdom who met the threshold. There are 9 principal categories which we've covered and we'll delve into in just a second. The final thing to say, by way of kind of setting the scene in terms of the data set, is that whilst all registered students are eligible to complete the Whatuni reviews, particularly through the physical collection, we make a bigger effort to try and focus in on first years and second years. And there's two main reasons we do that. The first is that by engaging with first and second years, we know that that is an opportunity to actually make some changes and make some improvements, ideally, by the time that those students get to the third year. But also, we try to avoid survey fatigue with final year students who we know many of them will be pressed into completing the National Student Survey in that year. So it is a representative sample across the piece, but there's a slightly heavier skew towards first and second year students. So that sets the scene in terms of the data set that we've got. Just a quick highlight on a summary of the results. Of the institutions that participated, 69 institutions have a score that is higher than the overall category, the University of the Year category in 2018. 55 universities saw their score decrease, and in terms of the countries, we had a slight improvement in the scores for English, Northern Irish and Welsh institutions, and a slight decrease for institutions across Scotland. All of the categories, and you'll see this in a second, increased their score year on year, with the exception of the clubs and societies category, which went down. So you can see up on the screen, here are the scores across the 9 principal categories. A couple of interesting things to note. The first is that clubs and societies and students' unions consistently have been the poorest scoring categories. The second thing to say is that the University of the Year, our overall category, has the highest score, and it's interesting that in a way that the component parts score slightly lower than the overall category. Then switching to what that's done year on year, I mentioned earlier that clubs and societies had decreased, and that's down just 0.08 on last year. All the other categories are up, but what you can see is a high degree of consistency actually across both across 2018 and 2019. But the category with the largest single biggest increase was the student support category, which increased by 0.08. So that's the kind of year-on-year picture. I'm just going to hand over now to Tristan, who's going to take us through section 2, which is a delve into what's most important to students. Tristan.
Thank you. Does well in these categories, then our analysis shows that they will do better in the University of the Year category overall. So if you're able to improve one of those, you are then likely to improve your overall satisfaction as well. So this first graph is showing us course and lecturers on the x-axis along the bottom there, and University of the Year on that y-axis, and every dot here represents an individual university. And the more diagonal this line is, the stronger the relationship between them. So the higher your course and lecturers score, the higher your University of the Year score. And what we find here is that course and lecturers has the strongest relationship of any category with University of the Year. And so of all the categories that we saw earlier when Aaron was speaking, this is the one where improvements made here are going to have the biggest single impact on the overall satisfaction. We also see strong correlations for those other 3 categories I mentioned. And so in all of these, we see that increasing or improving the support offered to students, or improving students' confidence in jobs they might get after university, or improving university facilities, all of these translate really, really well across into students' overall satisfaction. Just to go a bit deeper into that second strongest one, that student support category. This one had the second strongest correlation. And so it's therefore reasonable to think that if you can find ways to improve student support, you will notice that go across into an improvement for overall satisfaction. And we can actually dig deeper into that as well. And so it's not actually in these slides, but in a separate piece of analysis, we've found that the strongest correlation between any 2 categories is between student support and between courses and lecturers. And so what really jumps out from that is if you're able to improve how supported your students feel, that goes across into students' opinions on course and lecturers, and those both go towards students' opinion of their overall satisfaction. So these things all work together quite nicely, and we see these strong correlations. And so the kind of key takeaway is that there are several key categories to really focus on and improve that will lead to a really high overall satisfaction score.
Okay, so I'm Jonah. I'm going to take you through to the end now. So Okay, I think there's something wrong with my sound. I think everyone can hear me now. Okay, so I am going to begin by looking at the universities that were shortlisted for University of the Year, the top 10 universities, and then go through into a much deeper dive looking at the different categories and how they compare across different course and subject groups. So the radar diagram that you can now see on the screen has got those 3 or 4 key categories that Tristan has talked you through. And I think it's really important to emphasize that University of the Year is a proxy for overall student satisfaction. So for the purposes of the WSCAs, the Whatuni Student Choice Awards, it's University of the Year, but actually the question that is asked of the student when they fill out the form online or to one of our review collectors is about their overall satisfaction of their course and university experience. So as you can see there, the light green line at the top at University of the Year, that's Swansea, who won it in 2019. And you can also see that they do very well at courses and lecturers. As well. And I think what's also very important from this radar diagram is that you can see across those 4 important categories of courses and lecturers, job prospects and student support that there really isn't much difference at all in the top 10 category. All of those universities are doing incredibly well in all of those most important categories. However, where we do see some variations in the scoring is in Students' Union, and in the Students' Union we found very little correlation between students who found that to be satisfactory and their overall university experience. And there we can see Loughborough very much out in the lead, and the Royal Agricultural College of some way back. So it's really interesting to see how this radar diagram begins to support some of the correlations that Tristan has already talked you through. So, as I said, I'm now going to go in a bit of a deeper dive and look at some of these results by subject. So, first of all, if we look at standout subject areas. So what the diagram or the graph here is showing is the individual subjects scoring across all universities that we collected reviews from for the University of the Year category. And as you will see, there's really very little difference between the subject areas, with the exception of a small sample size of agriculture and related subjects up at the top. So agriculture and related subjects is getting the highest score for University of the Year, as opposed to some of the others, but there really isn't that much variation across all subject areas when we're looking at such a broad range of universities. So let's try and dig a little bit deeper and see if we can find anything more of interest there. So what I've done here is I'm still looking at all universities that we collected reviews from. However, this time I'm looking at the job prospects category. And not unsurprisingly, those with more direct professional outcomes, those courses with more professional outcomes, tend to perform better, which, given the government and the AGAR review, is slightly disappointing to see that students studying arts, social sciences and humanities subjects are actually ranking their job prospects lower before they've even entered the job market. So something that we might expect to see, and something that might confirm some of our assumptions. So let's continue through and go a little bit more granular. So now I'm no longer looking at all universities. I filtered just to look at Harper Adams, who won the job prospects category in 2019, and I'm just looking at that job prospects category. So given that the outlier in terms of overall satisfaction was agriculture related subjects, I was expecting that to be at the top of this list for Harper Adams, which obviously concentrates very much on those types of of courses, but actually I was quite surprised to see that it's their other courses that are actually performing much better in the Whiskers for job prospects. So it's courses such as agriculture, building and planning, engineering and technology that are actually getting them the scores that have won them this category in 2019. So whilst we'd expect, due to the sample size for agriculture, to be somewhere along that grey overall average line, I would have expected it to be much higher up the list. So I think whilst we need to be careful with the sample sizes, there's interesting things that different universities can learn as they delve deeper into this data. So I'm now switching back to the category of University of the Year, and I'm looking at Swansea University, who I hope you're all aware were the winners of the 2019 University of the Year, to see which course and subject areas they perform particularly well for, and therefore help them to get their University of the Year award. So you've got a very small sample size of education, but they're doing very, very well for much larger cohorts of students in terms of business management and marketing, engineering, and then a broader area of no subject where students have chosen not to state what their subject is. But I think what we can see here is that, that the majority of their courses are on or very much above the overall average in terms of the scoring, and that's what moved them through to winning University of the Year. So moving further on, I've now introducing a slightly different way of interrogating very much the same information. So I've taken the subject area of business management and marketing, where Swansea were particularly strong, and compared it to all the other university results for that subject in the Worcester category of University of the Year. And lo and behold, they're top. So that faculty or marketing team could now go out as part of their marketing collateral and confidently state that they are the top ranked university for business management and marketing in the country according to the Whiskers 2019. But possibly what's more interesting is the performance of other institutions on the list for this subject area. So what we can begin to see is that the grey bar is the average institution overall score for University of the Year, and the green or the orange circle at the end is the score that they received for this particular subject area. So we can see universities such as Sunderland, Southampton, Solent, Aston and Portsmouth are ranking particularly high for this subject area compared to their overall average. So this may mean that these universities would then want to go deeper into this data and look at if they're performing well for these types of programs in the Whiskers, which areas are they not performing particularly well, and where could they make improvements, and where are students maybe not as satisfied, and different things can be put in place to try and remedy that. So it can really begin to help to drive institutional decision making, along with the huge amount of other data available to universities at the moment. So we're coming towards the end of the deep dive, and I'm continuing to go further into looking at Swansea University and how they've performed. So this is a word cloud, for want of a better word, which is taking all of the information that students have put in the free text box at the end of their review. And on the left-hand side, we have Swansea University overall, and on the right-hand side, we have Swansea University for that faculty of business management and marketing, or that subject area, sorry, I should say, of business management and marketing, that was performing very well compared to the rest of the university. I think there's one or two interesting things that we can begin to pick out. So on the right hand side, if you look towards the bottom, you will see lecturers receiving round about 12%. If you were to then look at lecturers on the left-hand side, they're actually receiving around 7.5%. So what this means is that where people are overall more satisfied and more happy with the faculty, they're more likely to use the word lecturers than those who are less satisfied. So we can then begin to get qualitative data and meaning and intent behind the reviews to begin to understand some of the things that people find positive about their experience and some of the things that people find negative. So I should also have said that where the blue is darker, they're more positive, and where it's orange or yellow, they're more negative. So you can then begin to think what it is that people are finding that they like and dislike according to the different faculties, or according even to the different categories, and then you can begin to do further research to unpack and understand that further. So I think that was a really quick run through, and it's ensured that we've got plenty of time for questions, and that we can go back over areas where people maybe wanted to interrogate or ask questions about specific areas in particular slides. But I think I just want to finish with a few key takeaways. So I think it's really important to understand what factors impact the overall outcomes for universities across all the categories. I think we've gone through a myriad of different ways in which we can slice and dice the data to help you to understand maybe what's going on in your university, alongside the huge amount of other data sources that you use to make your decisions. I'll be entirely honest with you, the data really comes to life when you look at it for an individual university. So when I've been able to pick one university over all the others and go deeper and deeper into it, you begin to get very interesting narratives. With 70 people booked onto this webinar from many different universities, I didn't think it was fair to concentrate too much on one individual university. So that's why I tried to pick Harper Adams and Swansea as two universities that have done well over the last couple of years. But when you do get hold of the data, you'll be able to look at your performance against key categories. You'll be able to look at your individual performance against key competitor groupings. You can do that by mission group, or you can do it by self-selecting who you believe or identify as your key competitors. And you can look at your performance of your institution for individual subject areas in key categories, both against other subject areas within your institution, but also against your identified competitor set or different mission groups. So what we have done is we have published all of the category performance data online for you to use. So that's all of the information that Aaron and Tristan went through. So if you go to idp-connect.com, you can find all of those live Tableau dashboards, and you can interrogate them to your heart's content. By the end of this week, we will have the subject word cloud analysis and also the subject data up available for our account managers within our teams to use. And so we'll be asking people to contact their account managers, and then we'll be able to share all of that information with you through that. So that's really the really quick run through. And I think, Aaron, that leaves us a good 20-25 minutes to go through any questions that anybody has. So thank you, everybody, for listening.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We do now have time to take comments and questions. You may have questions about the overall data. You may have questions about the trends. You may have questions about the sort of functionality of the analysis. Very happy to do that. One question we do get asked commonly, and I may ask Jonah to kind of give a view on this, partly with his hat on now, but also he's worked previously in an institution. Any thoughts on what happens when you get some negative reviews? Of course, students will sometimes have strong opinions. What sorts of lessons do you think there are for an institution where perhaps they've received some negative reviews in a specific area?
Thanks, Aaron. So I think there's two reasons that you'd want to pay attention if you're receiving reviews that are less than positive. And I think the first is that obviously it gives you areas that you can investigate and areas that you can see how you can make improvements. But having gone through this data in quite a lot of detail, I haven't really found any universities that have got any across the board negativity. There's always real areas of strength and real areas, and then there may be some areas where there are weaknesses, and I think it's about learning from those strengths and seeing where you can replicate best practice within your organisation or within other organisations. But I think also from a student choice point of view, we've been doing a huge amount of work here at IDP Connect to understand the role of student reviews in the student decision-making process. And whilst that research is still ongoing, what we're finding that's incredibly interesting is that students want integrity, and they want to hear independent voices when they're researching universities. And actually, that if they see only really positive and really glowing reviews, then they tend to actually begin to disbelieve them, and they find universities that have a mixture of honest and truthful reviews actually much more of a rewarding to look at, and it paints them a much deeper picture of what it's like to study at that university. So I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with having one or two honest reviews on our sites. But again, we'd be more than happy to work with institutions to understand the sentiment amongst both the qualitative and the quantitative reviews.
Thanks, Jonah. We've had a question about kind of accessing institutional data. Tristan, do you want to say a little about how, what's publicly available on the on the website, and then sort of what analysis or how institutions can kind of get better to grips with their own data?
Yeah, sure. So as Jonah mentioned, there's a couple publicly available dashboards on idpconnect.com. These are mostly aggregate level at the moment. So you will be able to see some institution specific things. For example, those correlations that I showed earlier, we have an interactive version of that where you can play around with which categories on which axis and see how those correlations change, as well as where individual institutions lie on that map. Those radar diagrams that Jonah showed, those are also interactive and publicly available. And then the stuff that you would want to request to your account managers, that's the subject level information. So that's broken down by institution and by subject level. So it's really, really granular, but at the moment it'll be presented in a report from an account manager rather than being publicly available data on our website.
And I think just to add to that, I think one of the reasons we're being slightly cautious with the subject level data is we want to make sure that it's all being used in a way that takes into account some of the sample sizes. So we have got 41,000 reviews for this year, and we had a considerable amount the year before, and it's been going for five or 6 years. But as you get more and more granular, the sample sizes decrease. So especially at that subject level. So that's part of the reason that we present it in that way rather than publishing it straight online.
We've had a sort of a technical question in terms of the presentation itself. Obviously, as ever with these things, there's often quite a lot of data on a slide at any given time. So we have recorded this, and we'll subsequently make that available. And obviously, the slides that accompany that, there may be things that you want to kind of dwell on a little more carefully. So there is that opportunity. A separate question, which I'll invite comments on. The Welsh institutions, as you will have heard, have done very well this year. The overall winners were Swansea, but there were another number of other Welsh institutions that performed strongly across a number of categories. Do we think there's any sort of particular reason why those Welsh institutions happen to have done well that you'd want to venture a kind of a thought on?
We're just at the start. So when Jonas said those word clouds, for example, will start to be available at the end of this week, part of that is because we're still going through that process of doing the sentiment analysis between different institutions. So I'm hoping we'll be in a position to more robustly answer that question at the end of the week. But for now, we can't really say exactly why Wales have done so well compared to England. Perhaps part of it is that the universities that have done exceptionally well, for example, Swansea and Aberystwyth, who also I think won one of the other categories, as a proportion of all Welsh institutions, that's quite a lot of that sample size. So part of it is possibly just that there are some very strong institutions there that make up a big proportion of that Welsh average. But we will be looking to dig deeper into the sentiments expressed through the reviews themselves, and hopefully make that available at the end of this week.
I think I would just add to that as well that I think when it comes to going into such granular detail in terms of reviews, it's not something that we can necessarily answer sat in an office in Southwest London. I think I've visited a few Welsh institutions, but I'm certainly not an expert on it, and I think that's where working together we can work with the universities to understand what they mean better, because obviously no one knows the university as well as the people that work there and can begin to unpack some of the meaning behind them. So yeah, I don't think it would be fair, without having done the sentiment analysis, as Tristan said, to make any wide assumptions.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to note that there is a correlation, as you might expect, between institutions that do well in this and the National Student Survey, and indeed, universities' own understanding about why they perform well on other, on this and indeed other national measures. I suppose it is a combination of science, but also a little bit of kind of magic as well. So I think that it's at least reassuring to us that in some respects there is the correlation across the surveys. That said, you'll appreciate that whilst NSS is obviously a much more academically focused survey in terms of the questions, 27 questions in that survey, as for quite deliberate reasons is a broader take on the sort of wider student experience, hence categories like students' union and clubs and societies, city life, and so on. I'll turn to a different question here, and this maybe this likely one for Tristan. The question reads: are there any patterns more generally on the correlation plots in terms of institutional profile? And carefully and then helpfully gives the get out, or do you not have that visibility as yet? But I suppose if you just want to unpack a little bit more about the correlations between the fact that the big issues that had a relationship with overall satisfaction.
Sorry, do you mean to talk more on the 8 categories that we did correlations with? I'm not sure there's too much more to say other than what we went through. I suppose one part that we left out in this webinar was the reverse. So we talked about those categories that have really strong relationships and where making those small improvements to how supported your students feel, how well that translates across to the course and lecturers category and how well it translates across to the overall satisfaction category. But one thing that we left out was the opposite. So one thing that we found was the city life category. We actually found no correlation whatsoever. And so students were very happily rating their city right at the very top of the scale, and then perhaps not giving such a favorable overall satisfaction score, and vice versa. And we found that this was true for 2019, 2018, 2017, consistently. A student's opinion of the city life has no bearing on their opinion of their overall experience. And so when we looked at this in a bit more detail, we actually found that prior to going to university, the city life is one of the things that students or prospective students are most interested in. So before they get to your institution, they are really keen to read up on the vibrancy of that city life and how exciting it's going to be to live in this bustling area. But once they actually get there, it doesn't have a bearing on how satisfied they actually are. So there's kind of two ways of looking at it. When you're recruiting, when you're marketing, if you're in a city, it's absolutely something to shout about. But once you actually have your cohort come in, it's not going to have an impact. The things that can have an impact are the course and lecturers and the level of support that they feel.
Couple more questions here. First is, obviously we've heard about Wales performing very well. Were there any other regional trends? And I know that there are. I don't know whether either of you, I'll start with Tristan, perhaps on other sort of regional trends that stand out.
Yeah, so we found that Wales across all categories was actually, or I think across almost all categories, was stronger than Scotland, England and Ireland. And within that, we then saw that actually Scotland did quite well, especially in city life. And indeed, they had the winner, I believe, University of Edinburgh. So really strong performance from Scotland on that category. But then across the others, it really was just a story of how well those Welsh institutions are doing. Less of a difference between Scotland and England on those other ones.
And then within England, obviously London has historically done very poorly across practically all categories, apart from city life, which perhaps stands to reason. But London consistently does relatively poorly against the other regions. Again, there's a reasonable correlation between what we're seeing on areas like student support and so on, and the regional breakdowns that you get in the NSS.
What I would say is you can investigate that on some of those graphs we have on idpconnect.com. You can actually answer those questions by digging into those interactive graphs that Jonah showed very briefly earlier.
There's a question here which I might attempt at an answer, which is on why universities in the same city may see different ratings for city life. I mean, a couple of things I suppose immediately jump out to me, because yes, instinctively you would think that there should be a high degree of correlation between two universities in the same city, you know, Sheffield or Nottingham or Leeds and so on. But a couple of things when I've delved into the analysis that do stand out. The first is actually, even though there are two universities or sometimes more universities in the same city, their geographical proximity to the city centre isn't always the same. And so if one is further out than the other, that can make a difference. The second thing to say is that on city life, the student profile, the demography of those students, the age profile, the subjects that they're studying, can also have an impact on the extent to which they both value and engage with city life. So there is a fairly high degree of consistency, that said, between universities in the same city. Actually, we do largely see similar scores, but where there are some differences, usually they're not huge, but the differences I think can be explained partly by student demography and partly by geography, which again, when you go into some of the written reviews, that often becomes a lot more a lot clearer. And it's just worth saying that on the university that did win City, which was the University of Edinburgh, actually all of the universities across that city performed very well. So again, that was, I suppose, reassuring and great testament to, or a great message for the kind of marketeers in the universities based in the city of Edinburgh. We've had a question here, which again is a bit more operationally minded. It's specifically, where are the reports on the website? Tristan, do you want to just kind of make it clear how people can get hold of the kind of analysis that we've been partly speaking about?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I think we'll send the link round after this anyway, just so it's dead easy for everyone. But if people are itching and want to have a quick look now, if you go to idp-connect.com and then go to the news section, once that loads, there is an article. If you scroll down, when you get past the first 3 Editor's Choice articles, there's one called WSCA 2019 Interactive Data Visualizations. And in this article, there are embedded 2 interactive charts, each one with a little blurb about how exactly to use it.
Great. There's a final call for questions, but we're sort of 45 minutes into the session. So unless there are any final questions, we'll draw this to a close. Just to reiterate, we have been recording this, so we will circulate that. Apologies for a couple of occasions when we've had a mute button still on. We haven't missed anything significant in those periods, and as I say, the slides tell the story, but more importantly, the reviews themselves really bring this alive. It's just to underscore, I suppose, there are a number of things at play here. Obviously, we've got a range of different categories. You'll then be able to take a view for your university, which categories are the strongest for you and which areas are the greatest areas for development. This is the first year that we've done a subject. We have the capacity to do a subject breakdown. And so a lot of you might be interested in which of your discipline areas are performing above average and below average. For the above average ones, you can probably weave that into some of your marketing. For those that are below average, things that you can improve on. And we've also begun thinking about the kind of analysis of the text comments, where often, and it will be not surprising to you, students are not, they're actually often being quite constructive, and as well as where they are being critical, often they're offering suggestions and sometimes even solutions about how things can be improved. So I really would encourage you to have a look at the text comments. So we'll wrap things up there. Thanks very much for your time, and we'll circulate the slides and the presentation in due course. Thank you.